smiled on me. He's been good to me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
A worthy life. Using for a brief subject or discussion a worthy life. What does it mean to live a worthy life? I listened as the Bible study this week pondered this question and lifted up who they felt were worthy people in their lives. And I was inspired by some of the names they called. But, I began to ask myself the question. I said, who do you consider worthy? And you know where my mind went? It didn't go to someone that most people would consider perfect or holy or walking on water. You know where my mind went? My mind went to three men that when I was a senior in high school came to Bennettsville to work with a rites of passage program with young boys to teach them what it meant to be African, to be black, to be powerful, to be intelligent, to be wise, and to be angry. They set us down, me and 9 other young men, and they begin to breathe into us. And that was a part of who they were. They left their own families. They came all the way over there to work in our community, to work with us so that we could have a chance at success. Now when I think of living a worthy life, mentoring and breathing out and speaking to young people and people that need instruction. Wow. Isn't that what God calls us to do? Isn't that what's at the heart of this Ephesians 4 passage? God says, I'm locked up. Jesus, Paul was locked up. I'm in jail. But while I'm in jail, you all do the work. While I'm away from you, you all do the work. You all can do it. Hello, church. Hello, church. But that's what James is really talking about. I wonder if some of us right here today had to deal with a different set of credit scores. How would we get along? If some of us today in this church right here hadn't been born into the family we were born in and given the head start that we were given, would we be the same? If some of us hadn't had somebody to send you those boxes. Y'all remember the boxes when you went to college with the fruit and the candy and the salt meat. If nobody ever mentioned you even going to college or high school, or you had to stay home like some of your friends when you turned 15 and work the farm and you couldn't go away nowhere, would you be different if you hadn't had mama or big mama or auntie to bail you out when you lost your money or when you went bankrupt? Would your whole life story be different when you got pregnant in school and didn't have nobody to help you? Would your situation be different? What if you had to trade places with some of these folk that have gotten hooked on drugs and fallen out of society? Would you still be one of Wesley's finest? Or would you be out there wondering what we're doing in here? You see, it's only been a prayer and a chance and God's favor and God's deliverance that kept you where you are. You better be careful, as the streets say, hating on folk that ain't got no reason to be hated on. Because some of us do that, Couple points, I'll let you go. Point number 1. The church is no place for acts of favoritism. First of all, favoritism is really illegal. If it takes the form of discrimination, harassment, or mistreatment, that's illegal. You can't do that. You can't do it in a club or a church or even at work. You can't mistreat folk just because you favor some folk over others. You know them, or you know their mama, or they're your daughter, President Trump. You can't just put them in position. That's illegal. Hello? You got to understand also, favoritism is inconsistent with God. I wrestled with this because there's a difference between God's favor and favoritism. Favoritism looks at the outward appearance. Favoritism looks at who you are and who you know and how you're connected. God's favor looks at the heart. And there's a big difference there. God may have favor on some folk, but God doesn't pick out favorites. We can't do that at the church either. God doesn't let your stuff determine God's stuff. Hello? Number two, favorite Minister Leslie Williams Watson with the AAMLC. Another one of those groups I'm in, the African American Leadership Institute for the United States. Reverend Watson said, where we make our mistake in the church, and even as people, is we get distracted. You got to be careful, the little general. That's what we call a little general. She's about a little minister about this big. Must be about 80 years old, but full of fire. The little general, she looks and she says, beware of the distractions. What are you saying, Rev? Fox News, it's a distraction. This abortion issue, it's a distraction. Bringing up now the national debt, that's a distraction. The wall, distraction. Even, I mean, as sad as it is, the death of Gabby Patel, it's a distraction. All this talk last week about the government shutdown, a distraction. The racial tension in our communities, a distraction. Distracting the man and woman of God like the adversary was doing to Job, getting in between you and what God has called you to do. Now I know what you're thinking. Those are some serious issues, Rev. But you got to keep the main thing the main thing. You got to know that I was born to serve the Lord. I was born and created, and not just born the first time, but when I had my rebirth, when I had my baptism, something of the old died away, and this new me was born to make sure that God's kingdom comes upon the earth. The new me was born not to get distracted by arguments on this side and complaints on that side and adversaries in front of me and adversaries behind me, but God called me to fight the good fight of faith. Wesley, roof tiles being blown off the building, that's a distraction. AC units going out and coming on and going out, that's a distraction. What we as people of God got to get back to is teaching children in our family life center, in our fellowship hall, and teaching the community in our sanctuary. We got to live like we were called. What we were called to do. Stop being distracted. I want you to focus on what the enemy is doing. The enemy is just getting in your way, going back and forth. You got to stop worrying about the enemy and their foolishness. You can't afford to do that. Something. There's no reason that the Christian should not be prepared for the battle that we're in. You all remember, you all were in Sunday school as children, you all came to church, and if you've never been to church before and you converted, even in your adult life, when you were converted into the faithfulness, someone down the line told you that you got to stay prayed up, and you got to stay read up, and you got to stay in the Word of God no matter what you go through. But some of us go through some battles that we're not prepared for. And that's what's being written into the church in Ephesus by Paul to the church in Ephesians. He's saying, look, you need to get ready. Because the war is real. You need to build yourself up. You need to prepare yourself for battle. This imagery of the warrior, it kind of catches me off guard because, you know, I've been wrestling with this whole issue of the social justice warrior. And what does it mean to be in the army of the Lord? What does it mean to be fighting on God's side? And you know, I would think that in God's army, if the enemy's army got tanks and machine guns and 6 hours and laser pointers, then being on God's side, knowing that God is bigger than the enemy and better than the enemy, I think I'd have all these weapons too. Hello, somebody. You know? But when I look around at God's army, I don't see tanks and I don't see machine guns and I don't see stacks of money and I don't see all this military accoutrements. So I asked myself, I said, God, what do we have? And a quote from, of all people, Sitting Bull. Some of you all have heard of Sitting Bull. His real name, Hakapaya Lakota Sioux. He said, the warrior for us is one who sacrifices himself for the good of others. His task is to take care of the elderly, the defenseless, those who cannot provide for themselves, and above all, the children, the future of humanity. While Sue was talking about Native Americans and their fight for land in this country, it kind of hit me that the weapons that God used aren't always the same weapons that we think we should have. Hello, somebody. Because if it was up to us, we would have all these big guns and big machines, and they wouldn't do us no good. I thought about that battle between SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the Civil Rights Movement. SNCC said, we need to take guns like the Black Panthers and mount up and go fight in the streets. But the Civil Rights Committee, they said no. Said we need to march and appeal to the better nature of man. Now, there was a tension in that. But isn't that the same kind of tension being spoken to from Paul to the church in Ephesus, to the Ephesians, saying, hold on.